Were the defense lawyers here trying to lay the foundation for an ineffective assistance of counsel claim later on? Well, stay tuned. Let's find out about that. Hey there, Tony DeWitt here. I'm a retired Missouri attorney now living my best life on a beach in Florida. I offer content and commentary on current events in the law as well as some general legal topics, but I do not dispense legal advice by video. With that understanding out of the way, here's what we're discussing today. When you wear the white hat, it's very easy to get an expert like Dr. Uribe, as the prosecution did here. He's a top-notch expert, well-trained, well-qualified. He's testified before. He speaks English as a native English speaker, and he responds appropriately to the questions that are asked. When you're representing a criminal defendant, it's sometimes very difficult to get an expert witness. In my criminal trial, I was only able to call one witness, and that was a friend of the defendant. Suffice to say, it didn't do me any good because the guy was guilty as he could be. But the quality of the experts you get when you represent defendants is sometimes less than optimal. And without meaning to be too critical here, that certainly seems to be the case with Dr. Dragovich here. Dr. Dragovich speaks with an accent, and I am not critical of his accent. I'm not critical of his national origin. But what I am critical of is his inability to communicate well to a jury. That happens a lot, it seems, with medical examiners and forensic pathologists. A lot of them tend to be FMGs, what we would call foreign medical graduates. I may have told this story before about a friend of mine who tries murder cases in Jackson County, Missouri. Jackson County hired a new assistant medical examiner from Africa, probably came in on an H-1B visa. He had very good credentials. He was a terrific autopsy person. He did decent work, but he wasn't a native English speaker. For that reason, when you put him on the stand, he was difficult to control because he would just narrate. And that's what doctors do when they dictate reports. They narrate. So my friend would have to stop him and that sort of thing. But the real problem was that he often didn't understand the questions well, so he was difficult on direct exam. But if he was difficult on direct exam, he was absolute murder, no pun intended, for defendants to try to impeach on cross exam. My friend told the story of asking the doctor on direct what the cause of death was. And he said, hole, big hole, head, very, very dead. Well, there's only, being dead and alive, it's kind of binary. There's no gradation of being dead. You can't be very dead. You're either alive or you're dead. So there was a moment of levity in the courtroom as a result of that, but it undercut the doctor's credibility. And that was the key thing. So while I think it's a, kind of a cheap shot to take a jab at a doctor here for not being a native English speaker when he graduated from college in Belgrade, I'm not making fun of the accent. I'm just pointing out that he's not a native English speaker and therefore doesn't communicate well, and the jury's going to have to sift through his language in order to understand his meaning. And he testifies in a very imprecise manner. Compounding that issue is the fact that the defense attorney is terrible at asking questions. But before I go too far with that, I should point out that the prosecution has been equally terrible in not objecting to those bad questions. Say what you will, but the defense does object to stuff they don't like. The objections don't go anywhere, but at least they're demonstrating that they're awake, alert, paying attention, and know how to object. In this first clip, Dr. Dragovich explains his experience and training.
Your Honor, I would like to call Dr. Dragovich, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce his first name. I will let him do that.
All right. Doctor, would you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. You may be seated, sir.
Thank you.
You may proceed, Mr. Selden.
Thank you. Would you please state for the court your full name and how you spell it?
I'm Ljubiša Jovan Dragovich. That's Ljubisa. Dragovan, last Dragovic.
Where do you work, Dr. Dragovich, and what's your title?
I work in the capacity of chief forensic pathologist and chief medical examiner for County of Oakland in Michigan, and I work here in this building. This is my building, building 28 feet in Oakland County Government Complex, and this is one of our conference rooms for this purpose and other purposes, meetings and or whatever other needs.
Now, from your testimony, you're a doctor. What areas are you designated as a doctor? And by that question, do you have the title of a neuropathologist?
Oh, yes. Well, I'm a physician, and I graduated back 49 and a half years ago at Medical Faculty, University of Belgrade. And I went through multiple training as far as pathology. I'm trained in anatomical pathology, board certified by the Medical Board of Pathology. I'm board certified in neuropathology by the American Board of Pathology, and board certified in forensic pathology by the American Board of Pathology. Those occurred back in 1982, 1985, and 1987, respectively.
The doctor's information about the conference room and where he works and what they have there just seems a little out of whack. That was the first clue I got that this was not going to be your average expert witness. But then, as I mentioned, the person examining him doesn't know how to ask a question either.
All right. And in your job as a medical examiner and also a forensic pathologist, you conduct autopsies, do you not?
Objection, leading, and compound.
Yes, I actually conducted 6 of them over the weekend, 4
Okay.
on Saturday and 2 yesterday.
All right. Can you estimate, and if you can, fine. If you can't, can you estimate approximately how many autopsies you've done over your career?
I can't, but roughly it will be in thousands because I've been in this line of work for almost 40 years, and in the earlier days when I worked in Detroit for County of Wayne, I was very, very busy. I remember that in 1988 I performed approximately 1,200 autopsies that year only.
If they had done a dry run with this witness, what you would have gotten would have been something like this. Doctor, how many autopsies have you done in your career? I don't know the exact number, but it's in the thousands. So we know the good doctor has done thousands of autopsies. That's wonderful. But he's called as a neuropathologist, and that means he's supposed to explain how the brain works. But in order to do that, he has to demonstrate that he's mastered the medical records and understands all the things that are in there. This next clip demonstrates that he might not have the best recall when it comes to that medical record, and he seems to give great weight to the statements, self-serving statements I might add, made by the defendant at or near the time that these events occurred.
Do you believe that the totality of those records informs you enough to make an informed decision and to give your opinion and testimony here today in this case?
Yes.
On page 2 of your report,
Yes, sir.
you have a section titled Brief Case Synopsis and Issues to be Addressed. Would you give a brief synopsis of this case as you understand it and the issues you were to address.
Well, this is an unfortunate death of a 38-year-old man who was a bodybuilding enthusiast, and based on the information that took an excessive amount of the chloromethanes sulfate supplement that he purchased in Mexico, subsequently developed seizures, and that same day, which was February 6, 2019, as indicated, and lost consciousness or lost his balance and struck his head during a fall at home. Then became.
Let me stop you right there.
You see, this is what I was getting at before about not communicating well. He doesn't listen to the question. You probably noticed in the question that the lawyer highlighted briefly, but he didn't listen to the question, and as a result, he started to read from his report. And the lawyer knew that if he continued to do that, he was going to draw an objection, so he stopped him from doing that. But this happens throughout the testimony, and to summarize the testimony, I mean, basically he just refutes the idea that the guy had hypoglycemia that killed him. And the basis for that is ostensibly because he took these supplements or something. It's really difficult to sift through this, even for me, a trained lawyer, to sift through this guy's dissertation about why he's even there. But that's not the worst part. While the direct seemed to go on forever, the cross-examination was blissfully short but brutal. And the aim of the cross-examination was to show that the guy did not know what he was talking about when he was relying on a lot of information that was supplied by the defendant here. And this first little clip here is a good demonstration of that.
In your report, you stated that Michael took an excessive amount of enclomiphene citrate. Is that right?
I couldn't hear this part. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. In your report, you stated that Michael Cochran took an excessive amount of enclomiphene citrate. Is that correct?
Yes.
Where did that information come from?
From the materials that I reviewed. I believe that was the account that was provided by his spouse.
Okay. Were you aware that that substance was tested by the FBI?
Again, something I've learned. Was I aware of what?
That substance had been tested by the FBI?
I'm going to object to that, Your Honor. That hasn't been established yet. There's no reference to what substance, how it was achieved, anything about the specifics.
Your Honor, that has been established. It has been brought into evidence already with both of the FBI gentlemen that testified here. And you heard Lieutenant Bledsoe testify that he received that bottle from Donna Bolt, who advised that she received it from the defendant.
Objections overruled. Pose the question again so that the witness can hear.
Dr. Dragovich, were you aware that the bottle of enclomiphene citrate provided by the defendant was tested by the FBI?
No.
So you were not aware that that bottle was actually found to contain letrozole and not enclomiphene citrate?
No.
Another frivolous objection, and it's overruled. And then the doctor demonstrates that he does not know the records. He does not know the status of the case. He doesn't know actually the facts that he was relying on to issue his opinion.
So you don't believe that the profound hypoglycemia or the swelling on his brain caused by the hypoglycemia contributed to his death in any way?
I'm going to object to that question. There's no evidence that his hypoglycemia caused the swelling of his brain. That's a mischaracterization of the evidence.
Your Honor,
it's
the
suspected.
diagnosis on that MRI is diffuse hypoglycemic encephalopathy.
I've waited for hours for the defense to make a valid objection, and we finally have a valid objection. When the prosecuting attorney here says, well, it says that hypoglycemia caused diffuse encephalopathy. Encephalopathy is not brain swelling. That would be cerebral edema. She confuses cerebral edema with encephalopathy. Encephalopathy is brain death. Thus, the objection actually is a good objection here because there hasn't been a link established between edema and encephalopathy, and the MRI report talks about encephalopathy, not edema. So that's actually a pretty good objection, but it's going to be overruled because, again, neither of these two attorneys knows enough of the medicine to actually be good at articulating these issues. When I worked on medical malpractice cases with some of the best lawyers in the country when it comes to malpractice cases, one of the things that we would frequently do is we would do a medical trial brief because the judge sitting up there on the bench, he doesn't know the difference between cerebral edema and diffuse encephalopathy. He doesn't because that's not his bailiwick. He doesn't study that kind of stuff. So we would put together a trial brief and we would have, it's sort of like the thing from Alice's Restaurant, pictures with circles and arrows and paragraphs on the back of each one explaining what each one was. And we would do that because the judge needs to know when he's ruling on objections what's been admitted, what hasn't been admitted. He can stop and say, hey, wait a minute, let me look at the record here a minute. Let me go back and look at these and make sure that's what it says so I can be sure that I'm ruling on this right. That kind of thing is really helpful. And unfortunately, most criminal defendants don't have the money to pay for that kind of representation. Some do, but most do not. And unfortunately for Ms. Cochran, she spent her millions on other things. And as a result, she also had to pay some of it back, I guess. This is not going to, the objection leads to what I think is probably the most serious admission by this expert. And we'll get to that in just a second.
I'll overrule the objection. You may continue. Ask the question again, Ms. Akron.
Dr. Dragovich, the question was, you do not believe that the decedent's profound hypoglycemia or the significant swelling on his brain caused by that hypoglycemia led to his death.
I would think that's one of the components, but why and how it happens and what the proximate causes are have not been defined whatsoever. So the autopsy did not reveal anything along the line, and it did not show that on brain examination that there was anything but decomposition changes according to the autopsy report.
Did you hear what he said? Let's listen again.
I would think that's one of the components, but why and how it happened.
One of the components. In other words, it contributed to cause his death. So you don't have to show in this situation that it was the sole cause. You just have to show that it was a cause of the death. And this admission really undercuts his credibility, and it undercuts the credibility of the entire defense because they're relying on stuff that's not in the record. They're relying on self-serving statements by the defendants. And if that wasn't bad enough, the issue came up about the fact that the defense attorney edited the report of the expert. And suppose he does send you the draft. What you do is you don't edit it. What you do is you call him up on the phone and say, hey, look, on page 2, you got this typo. On page 4, you're saying, edema when what you really mean is encephalopathy. And then you have him fix it. That way, the difference between the draft and the final report can be explained away if it needs to be. But in this situation, they got the draft report and they're making it look like the expert is being directed to make changes to the report. And It's an unfair characterization because he really was just trying to clean the report up. But the real problem here is it makes the doctor look like a bloomin' idiot. Watch.
And I admit that I prepared this, or you prepared this draft report. I received it and I made some notations on it. Given that, I'm going to go through these alleged changes. I circled your initial submission date of December 12th of 2024, and I asked you to change the date to January 6th of 2025 because that's when you submitted your final version of this report. Would you remember that, or does that seem correct to you?
Yeah, that seems correct, yes.
Okay.
I really can't believe the prosecution's letting him get by with this. The lawyer is testifying here, and he's not supposed to be. This isn't cross-examination, this is redirect, and he has to ask open-ended questions, and he's not doing that. It could be because he wants to save time, I don't know, or it could be because he just doesn't understand what he's supposed to be doing. I'm not sure which of those two it is, but this is something the prosecution should be objecting to.
On the second page of this draft report, I circled a date that you had listed as February 16th, 2019, as the date when Michael Cochran's seizures first started around noon. I corrected that because that was an incorrect date. I notated that the correct date was not February 16th, but February 6th of 2019. Do you recall that?
Yeah, that was a typographic error on the bottom.
In the third paragraph, you end that paragraph with the word infant. I circled that and put a notation to admit it. Michael Cochran was not an infant. Is that correct?
Yes, I was puzzled by that word, but I didn't want to go back to my secretary and criticize her for putting a word that didn't belong. But at the end of the sentence, I don't know, maybe she was typing several reports simultaneously, who knows.
The defense did not have a good day. And the reason they didn't have a good day is because this witness was a terrible witness. And in addition to that, they got caught with their pants down on this editing issue. And how do you explain the idea that you thought this guy was an infant at some point? Your secretary is typing multiple reports at the same time. How does she do that? One hand on each typewriter, one hand on each computer. I don't understand that. This is not a serious excuse. This is not a serious reason for why the word infant, appears there. And you can bet that on closing argument, they are going to get beaten to death with this information and with all of these, things that are wrong from Dr. Dragovich. Not that I think any of this is really going to carry any weight with that jury, but who knows? We'll have to see. At any rate, that's what I have for you today. Sorry this went long. Thanks for watching my video. If you have a request for me to cover a topic, please send me an email to the address above, and in the subject line put video request. If you have comments, drop them in the comments down below. If you found the content worthy, please consider subscribing. Since I started doing this work, I have always asked listeners to consider doing just one kind thing every day to make somebody else smile or make their life better in some way. Please consider doing that. It makes the world a better place. Now, YouTube has some suggestions for other videos of mine you may find interesting.